I'm going to be a very hands-off MC. So the way this is going to work, everybody has their program. Everybody who's scheduled to speak is here. I'm going to invite up the first speaker. Please introduce yourself, tell us how you knew Pete, and share your stories. So Ken, come on up.
Good afternoon. I'm honored that Robin and Jackson and the family asked me to speak as we celebrate Pete's life. It's hard to follow all those moving pictures. I've been thinking a lot about Pete lately, and probably most of us have. I've also been thinking about my own life. Pete was 2 months younger than I am. And think about what I may leave behind. I want to mention a couple of other fallen brothers. The woman who left a few minutes ago, you may have noticed her flaming red hair, Laureen Bradley. She was in those pictures and a good friend of Pete's, and her husband, Les Cadman, died 4 days ago. He joined TDU in a wildcat strike in 1979, and he became Pete's friend ever since. And there will be a funeral tomorrow morning we have at a Baptist church in Garden City. There are leaflets for people who knew Les and would like to come. You're more than welcome. I lost another good friend a couple months ago, another friend of Pete's by the name of Steve Kindred. I think he was about 2 or 3 years older than me and Pete. I guess there'll be more losses now as we go ahead and more chances to think about my life. I hope you've had a chance to read some of the remembrances that have been written about Pete's life. I thought some of them were wonderful, and there was an excellent one in the New York Times. I think Robin has it here, and he deserved every word in it. And some of those remembrances, including the Times one, noted that one of Pete's baptisms in his life of activity in the Teamsters Union was when he was beaten publicly in the streets of Las Vegas in 1976. I just wanted to say that Steve Kindred was there with him, and he was beaten too. Steve was a hell of an agitator, but I guess he was a lousy bodyguard. I met Pete when we were 29 years young. That picture, there was one picture of me in there, and I think we were 30 in that. And we had just recently launched our TDU movement. How many of you here, by show of hands, are Teamsters or retired Teamsters? Let's see how many. A lot are in this house. People that worked with Pete and that knew Pete and knew what he stood for. And we had started our movement with some big ideas, like we would transform the Teamsters and the labor movement and make it a force for justice and equality, and a society where solidarity is more important than greed. And Pete never left those ideals till the day he died. Well, he showed up at one of our meetings in Cleveland, Ohio. Steve Kindred told me he was coming, and he said, "This guy's going to be important." What struck me was he didn't say anything in the whole meeting. He just introduced himself, and he was completely quiet, which was, I promise you, was totally unlike all the rest of us. And then he went home to Detroit, quiet, and he started to build like we were doing in Cleveland and Pittsburgh and other cities, but it turned out he was doing it a whole lot better. And he was getting a network of people to work together to start talking about reform of the Teamsters. This was just a couple of months after James R. Hoffa, Jimmy Hoffa, had died in July of '75. And Hoffa was from Local 299, like Pete. And so was the new president, Frank Fitzsimmons, so Pete was really at ground zero in the Union. Fitzsimmons was more interested in golfing with Nixon. I understand he wasn't any good at golf, and he was even worse at representing truck drivers. And he wanted to deflate our little movement. So he called a fake strike for 2 days in the national trucking industry, the first that had ever been called. Hoffa had never called a national strike. He called quickie regional strikes. He called it on Thursday and Friday. This is the good old days when we didn't have to work weekends. Remember those good old days when a blue-collar worker could get a weekend off? And so they used that to kind of deflate our steam, and I suppose it worked. Except in Detroit, where Pete had so many people organized, they stayed out in a wildcat strike. And I guess that was the moment that he became the Teamster Rebel. And it changed the course of his own life, like a fork in the road. The union leaders, a few months later, they actually expelled Pete from the union. And we promptly got him reinstated with a court injunction. Actually, both of his attorneys in that case are here today, Ann Thompson and Mike Pitt, who stayed his friends all those years. Then Pete got himself elected in that same, now we're in early '76, to be a delegate to the Teamster Convention. And of course, they're held in Las Vegas, where all the Teamsters pension money was. A lot of you here are collecting pensions from the Central States Fund, and you're hoping it'll have enough to keep paying those pensions that you earned. And he got up, and these things are like, in those days especially, it was a bunch of, they made me look young. I mean, it'd be a bunch of old white guys in relaxed fit pants and just waiting to go to the casino. The convention is fake. And Pete got up to the microphone and announced that the vote to elect Fitzsimmons was not unanimous. They had made a mistake. And that was the day he was beaten after that. Pete accepted the role of leader many times. I asked him to do things, and I think he always accepted, but he wasn't necessarily eager. He was the kind of leader, and Jackson talked about it, who would go behind and push people forward. The next speaker up here is going to be Dennis Wade. Dennis, you're up in about 2 minutes, so don't be slipping out the back. Maybe he'll tell you what Pete meant, because he was the kind of person that would be pushing on Dennis. He believed that ordinary people could become extraordinary people and then change the world. In our society, we seem to promote a different kind of leader, the one with the big talk and the big promises and the sound bites, and it doesn't seem to be working well. I think the kind of leader that believes in ordinary people, that's the real deal. He did a hell of a lot for our movement in those difficult days, and in the process, see, he had been the fair-haired boy in Local 299. Well, he didn't have hair, but he was still the fair-haired boy. There was a path for him into leadership at a young age. Office seniors people had made him a delegate to even the prior Teamster Convention when he was 25 years old. He could have been a union official and maybe a high up one. And he took a different track. He went on a different course. Wasn't going to be that fair-haired boy anymore. He was going to stand for something. He was going to take a rougher road, but one that led in a lot better direction. Jackson quoted the great labor leader of a century ago and the great socialist, great American, Eugene Debs. And I have a different favorite quote of Eugene Debs's, which is, "When I rise, it will be with the class, not from the class." And that summed up what Pete stood for. I've had a lot of people talk with me about Pete in the past month, and you can imagine who some of them were, but a lot of them, too, were young people that maybe only met him at a TDU convention after he was retired, or maybe never met him at all. But they read about our history. And we teach that history, what it takes to build a movement. Incidentally, Jackson was a little modest when he spoke. He's a good example of that. He talked about Pete's influence. Jackson is a leader in an important struggle in this country to defend public education for all of our children, not just a select few, and to fight for school teachers. You know, I never thought that the flunkies of corporate America would succeed in making school teacher a dirty word in this country. And I'm sure Jackson, as he said, would say Pete had some influence on his course. A lot of people who make history are not the ones who rise up. Pete never went into national office in the Teamsters, became a big official. But when we went on to make history in the 1990s, as he talked about well on that video. And we continue to do it today to transform the labor movement. And we have not succeeded in that process. But we keep fighting, and we keep fighting away at it. We're not going to give up. We know our history. We teach it to people. We know it was people like Les Cadman and Steve Kindred, and most certainly Pete Camarata, who started our movement. So I would say to Pete, if he were here, we miss you, and we're going to try to carry on in a way that you'd be proud of. Thank you.
First of all, I would like to extend my condolences to the family and relatives of Camaratas. Starting out with, I met Pete. We came through the freight Wildcats and the car hawk on Wildcats. We had 52 car haulers fired then. And after that, we went to Kent State. We were able to organize 250 people to come to Cleveland and form TDU. And my times with Pete was mostly at the local level. He was an organizer nationally, and when he was in Detroit, I was always with him. We could become very close friends. And Pete had tremendous courage for those that, under the threat of being fired for speaking out, to stand up to Fitzsimmons and say what he had to say takes tremendous courage. And also, if you're an activist, you're under pressure, you're always thinking about being fired. But through the collective strength of knowing that the rank and file is behind you is what really makes the people that are higher up to pursue the goals that we all want. And I'm just privileged to be a part of Pete's life from 1976 to here. And his legacy would probably be that we've won tremendous victories in TDU, but the main fight to take control of the Teamsters Union and follow TDU principles remains to be done. And I'm very happy to be associated with Pete, his family, and for all the good that he has done.
Hi, my name is Jim Sweeney. I knew Pete for 44 years. He was on the loading dock the day that I walked up and got my job. And he was afternoon committee man and welcomed me and became one of my best friends. And the shame of it is my lifelong best friend died the day before Pete. So I lost two guys in a matter of about 48 hours. So it was a tough weekend for me on that weekend. But I really don't want to focus on the negative. I want to focus on the positive. What a great guy Pete was. He would always stay at my house when he was in town after he moved to Chicago. And we had a lot of laughs and did a lot of things that I can't talk to you about. The fellow that died and Pete and I, one day we were riding our motorcycles on 8 Mile Road, and we were going a little too fast, and the police pulled up behind us, and the only one that pulled over was Pete, and he got the ticket, and we had a good laugh about that because we just kept on going, and he got the ticket that day. But as a union rep, you couldn't get a better guy. We got fired. 12 guys got fired on the afternoon shift about a year after I started there. We had working conditions that were very slippery on the loading dock, and he went to foreman and asked to get some speedy dry for the floor. And the foreman said, "Oh, we don't have any, we're not going to get any, and I don't care if you break your neck." Well, I think this was the very beginning of Pete as a union rep. He just got everybody together, and everybody punched the clock and left the foreman standing on the dock by himself. Of course, we all got fired, and we were off work for a day, and Local 299 represented us, and we were at Shelby Hotel in Detroit, and I was, I think, 17 or 18 years old, so I was pretty nervous. You know, I lost my first job, and I didn't understand what this was, and Pete was probably 23. We went and well, the business agent came out to the company and told us that I don't think I'm going to do much for you guys. You guys walked off the job. You kind of gave your jobs up. And Pete took the guy by the tie. Now, you have to remember, at this time, Pete was about 400 pounds. And he took the guy by the tie and walked him right out the door, out into the parking lot where we were, and just said, "Don't ever come back. Don't come back. We don't need you." So we went to Dave Johnson, who was the president of Local 299, and they had a meeting with the owner of our company. And what he told the owner of our company was, "You are now out of business. You either take these guys back to work or you are out of business. We will shut you down right now." So we all got our jobs back, but if Pete wouldn't have got his job back, I don't know if he would have had the future in the union that everybody sees. You know, he saw success there, and that opened his eyes, you know. So we've been through many, many things together, and Pete was never, ever, he was always a bachelor. He was never, ever as happy as he was when he got married and moved to Chicago. The family that he had in Chicago turned him into a different person, turned him into a wonderful, wonderful guy. And he was the happiest at the end of his life, much more so when he was younger. So, you know, I hope he rests in peace, and, you know, everybody keep fond memories, because I'm representing the Earl Smith guys where he worked, and, you know, we will all miss him. We just couldn't wait to see him every time he came to town. So, everybody have a good day. Keep smiling.
By my side walking, there's a voice within me talking. There's a word that needs a saying. Carry it on, carry it on, carry it on, carry it on.
Hi, good afternoon. My name's Larry Varicki, and I'm one of Pete's fraternity brothers. And I guess I'm going to lighten up the mood a little bit, I hope, relieving some of the fond memories that we've had with Pete over the years. If we go back quite a ways, Pete and I joined the oldest local social fraternity at Wayne State's University. Back in the 1920s, when it started, it was called the Arab Fraternity. And in the 60s, we changed it over to the Greek letters Phi Gamma Chi. And although we kept a lot of the traditions of the old guys that started the frat, we kind of invented a few new ones along the way, and probably a lot of them are not as socially acceptable in today's politically correct society, but be that as it may, we had a great time. It was in fall of 1967 that Pete and I and Mark and Jerry and 4 other brothers joined the fraternity. We went through pledging, had a great time, got hazed a bit. That wasn't so great, but we probably gave as good as we got. We did crazy things. You know, we had contests with other fraternity pledge classes, won the tug of war, and that was no problem with Pete at the end of the rope. You see, back then, Pete was a balding, bearded, motorcycle riding, 400-pound plus mountain of a pledge brother, and I was damn glad he was on our team. We used to meet at the fraternity house on Sundays and learn about the fraternity. The actives had their way with us and some of the things we did. I remember one night they took us out. They called it Fun Night, and it was basically a scavenger hunt where they kind of dressed us up in outlandish things and made up our faces and gave us a list of things to go out in the community to get. Things like a signed autograph from the Grecian Gardens and get the badge number from the desk sergeant at the 13th precinct. There was one thing we had to get a turd in the bottle. I don't know how Pete did that, but I didn't shake his hand that night. I know that. Yeah, we did a lot of crazy stuff. One other thing that comes to mind is we participated in a fraternity chug contest. And it was held over at the Traffic Jam, which is a bar over on Wayne State's campus. And you got to understand this, in a chug contest, it's a 3-person team, okay? And the purpose of it is he who could drink mugs of beer the fastest, okay? And they outfitted our 3 members with napkins because spillage counted, right? And if you had too much spillage, you were disqualified. Jerry Emmerich was one of our lead guys. He could drink a beer in 3.2 seconds back in those days, right, Jerry? But Pete was our anchor man, and the anchor man was critically important because they had to drink 2 beers, 2 mugs of beer. And it's kind of like the first guy goes, second guy goes. The anchor man goes once, twice, then we go around and do it a second time. So that's 4 beers in about less than a minute, and Pete could do it. And thank God he did. We won that chug contest, and today that mug sits in the back of the Traffic Jam today, and you can see our name emblazoned on it. One other thing, of course, it was Hell Weekend when you were a pledge. That was our informal initiation into the fraternity, and it was hell. But that weekend started out where the actives would dress us up, blindfold us. They set us out outside the walls of Jackson State Prison. Thank God it was outside the walls. They gave us a list of clues to figure out how to find them in the next 24 hours. Well, fortunately, Pete had a plan. That plan is he hid some change in a remote spot in his body. He was able to make a phone call, but there weren't any cell phones back in '67, by the way. Made a phone call, and out came a couple of cards. And in those cards were his sisters, Rose and Kathy and Joanne. And I thank you again, guys, for making that part of the weekend a little more tolerable for us. Well, eventually we became actives and had a great time in the fraternities. We had parties, we had toga parties, we had wine parties, we had sweetheart parties, we had Halloween parties, and we got some pictures in the back, and you can see Pete dancing at every one of them. Kind of like Jackson was referring to as Dionysian days. That was kind of those days that we celebrated together. Pete, on Sunday nights, we'd have our fraternity meetings. Pete was our sergeant at arms, and he could help us facilitate those meetings. And the man knew Robert's Rules of Orders, and he did a hell of a job moving the meetings along. He used to tell me, subsequently, when he was starting a lot of his TDU work and organizing that reform movement, how much success he was having running those meetings, just running them the same way we ran the frat meetings. Kind of interesting. Back in the, speaking of the ties that we had with Pete in his union days, there was one night in particular when he was running a TDU meeting over on the east side, and he asked one of our fraternity brothers, Frank Spanky, "Hey, Frank, wave your hand back there, would you?" For a big Frank, he was a Warren cop back then, and Pete had asked him to come out and provide some security for us, for the meeting. And he's got a hell of a story to talk about that day because some of the establishment teamsters showed up and tried to break up that meeting. If you ever get a chance this afternoon, go over and talk to Frank. He'd do a pretty good story. He'd tell it much better than the way I could. A lot of things that we did back then. We were a 60s group. We lived the culture. Back then, Pete, he took some time to live in the house. Back especially when he was having all that trouble with the union. Where they were kind of out looking for him, right? And he moved into the house. He used to laugh. He said they could never find me because we were living over on Virginia Park, which was about a half mile north of where the GM building headquarters used to be. He used to laugh that they could never find him, and probably even if they knew where he was, they would think twice about coming into that neck of the woods. Eventually we became alumni, moved on, we get married and get on, but we always kept in touch, whether it was playing softball together or investment clubs, but especially Founders Day. Every Tuesday before Thanksgiving, the fraternity would meet together down at Wayne State University, have dinner together, kind of catch up on where everybody was at, and relive some of the good times. And Pete never missed an opportunity to make Founders Day on his way to see his family on Thanksgiving. I remember Pete, when I think back on his life, a lot of things strike me, but most important, the thing that strikes me is his social consciousness. He had it, right down to his roots. I can remember the, things, evidence of, like in '68, we went to Washington, D.C. to protest the war. I saw evidence of it when he took me to his parish at St. Margaret Mary's in those late '60s when there was nobody that attended Mass. In fact, we went there, and it was him, me, and the priest, and a couple of parishioners. And he had a very strong faith and belief in social kinds of things. I saw it when he became godfather to my oldest daughter, Nicole. I saw it in very many ways, for the love he had for his family, the loyalty and support he gave to his fraternity, and to his brother, Teamsters, union brothers and sisters. He was a great man. I had an opportunity a couple of months ago. Jim Smith, another fraternity brother, and myself and Pete Nagara and Mike Blatch got a chance to take a road trip out to Chicago and see Pete over the Christmas holidays. And we got a chance to, spend several hours with him, reliving old times, breaking bread together. Robin, God bless her, was hobbling around with a broken foot in a wheelchair, but it was a good time. And we ended the night singing our fraternity song, which we always did at the end of every Founders Day. And when Robin asked me to come speak today, she asked that, if we had a chance, maybe we could sing that song one more time. And we're going to do it, Robin. So I asked the brothers on the side, if you will, can we gather around the literature table there, and we'll sing that song, and I'm sure Pete's up there singing it with us.
Together, let us part and be